Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. I'm coming to you live from the ploughing in Ratheniska, rather wet morning here, and apologies for the background noise. And if you can't hear me clearly, please just put it in there in the chat. I'll try and I'll obviously be up close and personal in terms of my view here on the screen, just in order to keep close to the microphone. Okay, so today I'm just going to do a review of the breeding season, or talk to you about reviewing your breeding season for 2022. Just to see if we can make it changes or do something differently, or try to repeat maybe what has gone well in terms of trying to have successful breeding seasons into the future, or more successful breeding seasons going into the future. So it'll be a short one again today, kind of 15 minutes or thereabouts. And as I said, if you can't hear me clearly, please do just let me know, okay? So as I said, talking about reviewing the breeding season today. So why do we want to do a review of the breeding season? Well, first, we want to see what was the outcome. So lots of people are scanning at the moment, and some people are waiting to scan. So obviously, if you're waiting to scan, you don't fully know the outcome. If you have scanned, you have a fairly good idea that you've 99% of the stock that you're going to have available to you to calve next year will be identified. There are always going to be animals that will slip through the net, I suppose, from between here and calving. And as the farmer said recently at a discussion group, the cows that you actually have to calve are the cows that are calving on the 1st of January, really, that they're the ones that have stayed in calf throughout the period. So we could still have a few losses from between here and then, but hopefully those that are scanned in calf, the vast majority of them will be on hand to calve next year. So that's figuring out the outcome. So the outcome can only be really and truly deciphered from scanning. If we haven't scanning, we're depending on the service dates that we've entered for RAI, or maybe the bull and so forth, if we've copped those. And sometimes they can be right, but sometimes they can also be wrong, obviously, because quite often bulls can do a lot of their work under the cover of darkness, quite literally, and you wouldn't actually know the cows that have broken down have been served in some cases, especially when tail paint, the work around tail paint, etc., fades away, I suppose, as the breeding season goes on, and especially when bulls go in, we get less conscious of tail paint and so forth. So we maybe not always conscious of cows coming into heat later in the breeding season. So in terms of if we do our scanning, and it's very important that that information is added into ICBF in order to generate the reports and so forth. And I'll show you an example of a report for a farm in a minute. And you can see, looking at the background data to the farm yesterday, preparing the presentation, I can see that he hasn't actually scanned his heifers yet. So you can see from the report that it looks like he has very good information coming back from his heifers, but we're not 100% sure that this is right. So once we have our scanning data, we want to look at what cows are empty, really, I suppose. And I suppose maybe looking in terms of the overall number, in terms of actual conception rate, is it where it should be? And we'll come to that in a minute. What worked well? And we want to try and keep a note of that from the point of view of trying to repeat it next year as well. So the slides aren't moving yet now, so they shouldn't be moving. And there may be a bit of a delay just from a question coming in there. So what worked well, as I said, trying to note what you need to repeat next year, and then what didn't work well. So where are the weaknesses? So the cows that are actually empty this year, or the heifers maybe that are empty this year, has there been something that you have done or something that you haven't done maybe that has facilitated this in terms of the cows actually being empty? So we need to plan to address those deficiencies next year. And again, it's important to note those deficiencies, because if we don't make a note of them, we won't be able to remember next year. With the best will in the world, we're not going to actually remember next year. So just moving on. So this is just, I suppose, to help to plan for next spring as well. This is the information that you get when you enter your scanning data into ICBF. You can see the 2023 predicted in the red bars here on the right-hand side on the chart, and the 2022 ones as they actually happened, because as they were recorded in the January or in the black. We can see that our breeding season is slightly early start date on the farm in question here at the 14th of April, relative to a lot of farms. Just calves, a good few cows in the month of January. 11-week breeding season for cows, 6 weeks of records for the heifers anyway. And you can see that the whole herd then obviously an 11-week breeding season. And we can see then that we're, based on that fertility data that we have, that we're actually getting the service per conception at 1.5 for cows, which is very good, 1.3 for the heifers. So that's, I suppose, as I said, it helps you to see that we can see here that we've over 35% of the herd calving in January here, and just short of 50% calving here, which would be fairly typical of this herd. Very high 6-week calving rate, generally in the mid to high 80s, and that's going to be repeated again. And you can see that there's possibly a slight change. I haven't been talking to the farmer about the figures now. Slight change in that he's maybe slightly pushing a little bit more towards February calving, which is something I've been pushing him for with a good number of years, because he needs to get out to grass that bit quicker, I think, potentially. So just, you can see, as I said, it can give you an idea of what to expect. When is the tsunami going to hit you in terms of calvings, and trying to be prepared for that. And I suppose it's no harm in terms of a wake-up call. We're kind of in cruise control now at the moment. As I said, we're at the ploughing here today, and obviously people, as a result, are kind of in a relaxation mode, I would say, to a certain extent now. It is that kind of time on dairy farms. We are running into the start of October. We do need to start getting prepared, and some of the very organised farmers are always ready for their calving, and this will be the case for this guy, that he needs to be ready for calving before Christmas, really. So there's work to be done in terms of getting sheds prepared, making sure we're ready. And as I said, okay, this is a herd of 70 cows, but 85% of them are going to be calved in 6 weeks. So that means that there's a workload associated with that we need to prepare for. And having the scanning information gives us a greater level of knowledge in terms of when that work is going to hit us. I suppose I've just taken screenshots from the end of season fertility report for this farm, and you get a review of the breeding season, how it went. And you can see that the submission rate is probably slightly below, or is slightly below, where we would like it to be. And I suppose, again, the graphic paints 1,000 pictures in terms of being able to see it very clearly that we've a slight dip here in this. When we look down through the figures on the left-hand side here, you can see that we had an 85% 3-week submission rate, and we target there is to be at 90%. And I'll talk about this now in a second. And you can see that the national average figure is only 71%. Our 42-day submission rate then is only 91%. So we only gain 6% in terms of the submission rate between week 3 and week 6. And again, that's only 86% at the national average basis. First service conception rate is 63% for the herd here, national average showing at 58. You can see the 2 points here on the right-hand side of the screen then. So we're talking about assessing the submission rate and establishing any reasons for it not being achieved. So a lot of the time we would see with commercial farm data, when we look at them in terms of fertility reports, that quite often farmers won't have actually marked out cows that they intend not breeding for the year, and they get counted into the calculation when it's been done. And as a result, the 85% here may not accurately reflect the cows that are being submitted for AI in 2022 breeding season. The other question, that if that's not an issue, the other issue can often be late calvers. So if we have cows calving in this scenario in April, which is very rare, to be fair to this farmer, it's going to be very difficult, obviously, to submit them in the first 3 weeks of breeding season when we're starting our breeding season on the 15th of April. So our cows calving late, if they are, something needs to be done with them in order to get them back in line. Generally speaking, once a day or feedering and so forth, actions need to be taken. So I've talked about that during the course of the year, and people will be aware of it, but just rethink back to what you did with those late calvers. Did you do anything with them? Did you do something with them and it wasn't a success? And maybe can we change the work around that to avoid the late calvers from next year on, I suppose, ideally, or to minimize them as much as possible. And then also to actually see what you did, you would say, in terms of the once a day, or maybe see the protocols or whatever, what worked and what didn't work, and see is there any advantage in making adjustments to that into the future. Then in terms of that third point on the chart on the left here, assessing the conception rate, our ideal target is that we're over 60% conception rate to first service. If we're less than that, we need to be examining that in particular, because there's some fundamental issue at fault if we're not achieving the conception rate of greater than 60%. So then this just finalizes, I suppose, the top chart is finalizing the actual 6-week pregnancy rate. And as I said, the cows are at 77%, and that's based on the scanning data. And you can see that we have 100% at 0.5 here for the heifers. And as I said, looking back on the profiles on this farm yesterday evening, you can see that he hasn't actually scanned his heifers yet. So that 100% may not be 100% if you. So even though it says that 94% of them are due to calve in 6 weeks, there is a possibility that that may drop a little bit, but it shouldn't drop dramatically. And then the other point would be in relation to the repeat intervals, that we can see here that there's a variation between short, normal, and prolonged repeat intervals. And again, if there's a big variation around the normal, that prolonged or short, then we may have to ask questions about our actual breeding situation on our farm and our identification of cows in heat. So if we've short repeats, we're obviously maybe going in too quickly when we're picking up repeats. If we're normal, obviously we're relatively okay. And then prolonged can often that can kind of come up maybe when we have repeats that are longer than your 21 days anyway. And so they're going to be they can be slightly higher again. But if we've good conception rates, normal repeat intervals, generally speaking, things are looking like they're going okay. But if we've a lot of short repeats and a lot of long repeats, it means we have a lot of repeats, obviously, if they're long, and maybe means that we're going a little bit too soon with our maybe being a bit over anxious maybe around submitting cows for AI if we've a lot of short intervals as well. Finally, I suppose, and you'll see here that I've taken the last two pieces off the report here. It breaks down the herd into the lactation numbers, and you can see how they've performed independent of one another. So our first, second, and third to fifth, and then our 6+. Obviously, our 6+, we would be expecting probably higher fall-off rates in those. We'd be expecting younger cows to perform better. And as you can see, we've 2+ serves per conception, basically, in relation to the older cows, where it's kind of averaging out around 1.3 probably there between the first, second, and third to fifth lactations. So you can assess there then as well, I suppose, where that's useful is maybe to get a particular group of cows, in particular heifers and maybe second calvers. Did they come under a lot of pressure at any particular time in the run into breeding maybe, or during actual breeding? So how did they perform? But in this case, they performed very well. We're quite happy with that overall 1.5 serves per conception. So in general, we're quite happy with the performance of this herd. But again, it's just to point out to look at these charts once you've done your scanning, enter it into ICBF, run the report, and you can get this information. And then I suppose the other information that's always useful, again, I've just blocked out the names of the bulls here because I don't want to be biased against any bull team, even though they've actually performed fairly well here. But you can see that there is variation. So we have 2 bulls here that have only managed to put 50% of the cows that they were used on in calf. Now, that could well be the fault of the cow. So don't always necessarily jump to the conclusion that it's a fault with the bull. The other thing that we can see is the number of cows that we actually have served with the different bulls. And in the case here, the only criticism of this herd is that there's probably 1 or 2 serves more than should be used if we're using the 15% maximum target for the number of inseminations by any individual bull. On the flip side of that, though, you would have to say that there's actually a greater spread of bulls. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 bulls used on this farm, and the minimum requirement was that they would use 7 bulls for the size of the herd that they're dealing with. So they've ticked a lot of the boxes. And as I said, 1 or 2 serves actually extra over the top here would throw off on a smaller herd, would throw off the numbers quite significantly very quickly. So it's only 1 or 2 serves here that have pushed that that top use bull over the 15% limit. So interesting information there, I suppose. And in particular, as I said, if you've a lot of straws used and everything else went well, and a particular bull has had a weakness, we'll say, then you can identify not to use that bull again in the future. Just to summarize, so it's very important that people upload their scanning information to ICBF to ensure that they have accurate calving dates for next year. And I suppose obviously just to give us a better picture of how fertility is going, the more information that we get in, the better. And all you actually have to do in terms of doing this is actually identify the empty cows. If the cows are in calf, you don't actually have to identify them. It automatically assumes that they're in calf unless you tell it otherwise. Once you have that information in, ask your advisor or get onto the lads in ICBF, or if you're in a position to do it yourself. And it's relatively straightforward. If you Google end of season fertility report ICBF, you'll see a video there that Dan Reardon has done and to talk you through how to actually run the report. And then print that off and examine it exactly as I've talked through there this morning. Figure out then what went well and what didn't. And I suppose the big thing is to take note to avoid the pitfalls and repeat the successes. So Things that could affect animals is obviously pre-breeding nutrition. So I did the pre-breeding nutrition lack. I suppose we were a bit tight in grass at different stages in the run into breeding this year, and that could potentially impact on herd fertility, because it's obviously impacting at the time when the egg is being produced for the first weeks of the breeding season. Mineral nutrition is something that's becoming more and more of an issue as far as I can see as well. So we need to make sure that we're covering that off to the full and best of our ability to make sure the cows have adequate levels of minerals. So pica was an issue on farms this year. So phosphorus, it can have an impact on fertility as well. So if we have pica issues this year, we need to be conscious of them early on from an early stage next year so that we won't run into the same trouble. So that's it for today. We'll be back next week. Next week, we're going to look at grass again. Want to talk to a farmer that's in a situation, we'll say, I suppose, on drier land where we're struggling to make cover up, and just get their insight into what they're planning to do in terms of this last rotation and how they're fixed for silage. So we look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope the sound was okay. As I said, bit of noise in the background. Look forward to talking to you next week, and safe farming in the meantime. Thank you.